The fluorescent lights of the community clubhouse hummed with a monotonous, oppressive buzz, casting a sterile, greenish glow over the 20 or so homeowners seated in rigid, plastic chairs. It was the first Tuesday of the month, which meant it was time for the Grandview Park Homeowners Association Board of Directors meeting. Alex sat in the back row, a reluctant observer. He and his wife, Sarah, had only moved in 6 months ago, and this was his third meeting. The first two had been a tedious blur of landscaping budgets and pool pump maintenance reports. This one, however, felt different. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with seasonal irrigation schedules. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table draped in a cheap polyester skirt, sat the board. And at the center of the board, like a queen holding court, sat Carol Miller, the president. Carol was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly lacquered blonde hair, a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and a voice that could curdle milk with its patronizing sweetness. "And that brings us to item 7 on the agenda," Carol announced, her gaze sweeping the room with an air of practiced authority. "Architectural review compliance, Mrs. Gable." A frail, white-haired woman in the front row flinched, her hands clutching the worn strap of her handbag. This was Eleanor Gable, from the corner house on Willow Creek Lane. She was a widow in her 80s who spent most of her days tending to a vibrant, meticulously cared-for garden. "Yes," Mrs. Gable's voice was a whisper. "Eleanor, we've sent you 2 courtesy notices regarding the unapproved statuary in your front flower bed," Carol said, her tone dripping with false patience. "As you know, the rules and regulations, Section 4, subsection C, clearly state that all decorative yard items must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for prior approval." Mrs. Gable looked bewildered. The gnome. "The gnome, as you call it, is an unapproved decorative item," Carol corrected her smoothly. "It is 18 inches tall, brightly painted, and, frankly, not in keeping with the established aesthetic of the Grandview Park community." A murmur rippled through the room. Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had seen the gnome. It was a cheerful little ceramic figure peeking out from behind a rosebush, a harmless splash of color in a sea of manicured, monotonous lawns. "But my grandchildren gave it to me for my birthday," Mrs. Gable explained, her voice trembling slightly. "It's just a bit of fun." "Fun is not the issue, Eleanor. Compliance is the issue," Carol stated, her smile tightening. The property manager, a harried-looking man named Dave from Sterling Management, slid a piece of paper in front of her. Carol glanced at it. "You have failed to respond to the courtesy notices. Therefore, the board has no choice but to issue a formal violation. You have 14 days to remove the item or submit a formal ARC application, which, I must advise you, is unlikely to be approved. If you fail to comply, a fine of $25 per day will be levied against your account. Are we clear?" Mrs. Gable shrank into her chair, her face flushed with a mixture of confusion and humiliation. "Yes, Carol. I'll take care of it." She looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Alex watched the exchange, a cold sense of unease creeping over him. It wasn't just the absurdity of persecuting an old woman over a garden gnome. It was the public spectacle, the casual cruelty of it. Carol hadn't just enforced a rule, she had made an example of someone. She had asserted her dominance. And the rest of the room, with their averted eyes and uncomfortable silence, had let her. Alex looked at the other board members, 2 men and another woman who stared blankly at their notes, their faces impassive masks. They were props. This was Carol's show. He felt a sudden, sharp need to leave, to get back to his own quiet corner of Grandview Park, back to the life he was so carefully trying to build. That life was centered around Sarah. They had moved to this quiet suburb, with its tree-lined streets and promises of community, for a reason, after a long, brutal illness that had consumed the better part of 2 years. Sarah needed peace. She needed a sanctuary, a place where the world felt manageable again. Their new house, with its large, neglected backyard, was meant to be that place. Alex was an architect. He thought in terms of lines, structures, and purpose. He saw the world as a series of problems to be solved with elegant, logical design. For Sarah, he had designed a therapy garden. It wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a carefully planned space with a winding stone path for meditative walks, raised beds to make gardening easier on her back, a small water feature for calming sound, and fragrant herbs known for their soothing properties. And, at the heart of the design, enclosing the most private part of the garden, was a fence. It wasn't a large fence, just a simple, 4-foot-high horizontal slat fence made of clear-grained cedar. It was tasteful, modern, and designed to provide a gentle screen from the neighbors without feeling like a fortress. Before he even ordered the materials, Alex had done his homework. He was a man who believed in rules and blueprints. He'd spent an entire evening with a highlighter and a copy of the Grandview Park Covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs, the community's Bible. He read every line about setbacks, height restrictions, and approved materials. He even cross-referenced the official county plat map he'd received at closing to confirm his property lines. The fence would be located 10 feet inside his rear property line, well within his private lot, and nowhere near a common area or designated easement. He found the key clause, the one that gave him confidence, and highlighted it in yellow, paragraph 8.4. 2, which stated, "The association's authority to regulate structures is confined exclusively to common areas, as defined in the official plat map on file with the county." His backyard was not a common area. Satisfied, he submitted the plans to the Architectural Review Committee, received a standard, rubber-stamped approval form a week later, and got to work. Building it himself was part of the therapy for both of them. He enjoyed the precision of the work, the smell of fresh-cut cedar, the satisfying thud of setting a post perfectly plumb. Sarah would sit in a lawn chair nearby, a soft blanket over her lap, offering quiet encouragement and sipping tea. As the fence took shape, so did a sense of hope. It was more than wood and screws. It was a boundary, a physical manifestation of the safe space they were creating. It was a promise of quiet mornings and peaceful afternoons, shielded from the world. When he hammered in the last nail, they stood back and admired it. The warm, reddish wood glowed in the late afternoon sun. It was perfect. It was theirs. 2 weeks after the HOA meeting, the certified letter arrived. Alex saw the green and white sticker through the small window of the envelope and felt that same knot from the clubhouse meeting tighten in his chest again. Certified mail was never good news. He signed the mail carrier's electronic pad with a sense of foreboding and carried the stiff, heavy envelope into his home office. He slid it open with a letter opener, his movements precise and controlled, a stark contrast to the sudden, unsteady beat in his ribs. The letter was printed on heavy bond paper. The HOA's logo, a generic swooping oak tree embossed at the top. It was a formal violation notice. "Dear Mr. Henderson," it began, the impersonal salutation, a clear sign of what was to follow. "This letter serves as formal notice that a violation of the community's governing documents has been observed on your property at 124 Willow Creek Lane. A recently constructed fence in your rear yard has been found to be in non-compliance. Alex scanned the page, his eyes searching for the specific rule he had supposedly broken. There was none. The letter cited no bylaw, no article, no section. It just continued with vague, ominous language. The structure in question encroaches upon a designated common area view corridor, negatively impacting the aesthetic harmony of the community. As per the authority granted to the Board of Directors, you are hereby instructed to remove the unapproved structure within 14 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in further action, including the imposition of monetary penalties and any and all associated legal costs. It was signed not by a person, but by the Grandview Park Board of Directors. Alex read the letter twice, then a third time. View corridor. The term was meaningless. It wasn't in the CC&Rs he had so carefully studied. He walked to the window of his office, which looked out over the backyard. He saw the fence, a clean, handsome line of cedar. Beyond it was his neighbor's yard, and beyond that, another neighbor's. There was no sweeping vista, no dramatic landscape to preserve. It was a standard suburban block. The claim was absurd. It was a fiction. He pulled out his file, the one containing his deed, the plat map, and his highlighted copy of the CC&Rs. He laid the plat map on his desk, its crisp lines clearly delineating Lot 124. His lot. There was no easement, no note, no mention of a view corridor. His fence was situated squarely, undeniably, on his private property, the HOA's authority. As per Paragraph 8.4.2 ended at his property line. This wasn't a mistake. Alex knew that with chilling certainty. This was a choice. Just like the public humiliation of Mrs. Gable over her gnome. This was an exercise in power, and for reasons he couldn't possibly comprehend. That power was now being aimed directly at him. At the sanctuary he had so carefully built for his wife. He sat down at his desk, his architect's mind shifting from building things to deconstructing them. He would not be intimidated. He would respond with logic, with facts, with the very rules they claimed to be enforcing. He rolled a fresh sheet of paper into his printer and began to type. Alex believed in the power of reason. He believed that if you presented a clear, logical argument, supported by verifiable facts, the truth would prevail. It was the foundation of his profession and his personal philosophy. He spent the next hour crafting a polite, professional, and irrefutable response to the board's violation notice. He began by acknowledging receipt of their letter. He then systematically dismantled their claim. He stated that the fence was constructed entirely within the boundaries of his private lot, as confirmed by the official county plat map, a copy of which he was enclosing. He respectfully requested that the board clarify the specific article, section, and subsection of the CC&Rs or bylaws that defined a common area view corridor and granted the association authority over structures on a homeowner's private property. He attached a copy of his ARC approval form for the fence. He concluded by expressing his confidence that this was simply a misunderstanding that could be easily rectified. He printed it, made a copy for his files, and sent the original via certified mail to Sterling Management, ensuring he had a paper trail. For a week, he heard nothing. A tense, quiet week in which he tried to shield Sarah from his growing anxiety. She could sense it anyway. She would watch him from the kitchen as he stood at the office window, staring at the fence as if it were a ticking bomb. It's just a misunderstanding. Alex, she'd say, her voice soft but strained. They'll see your letter and realize they made a mistake. He wanted to believe her. On the 10th day, an email arrived. It was from Dave, the property manager. It was not the considered response Alex had expected. It was a one-paragraph form letter. Mr. Henderson, it read, "Thank you for your correspondence. The board has reviewed your position. However, their decision stands. The fence is in violation. Please be advised that the 14-day compliance period ends on June 15th. We trust you will take the necessary action to avoid penalties. The email was a digital slap in the face. It ignored his evidence. It refused his request for clarification. It was a brick wall of bureaucratic indifference. His carefully constructed argument, his survey, his appeal to the rules, all of it had been dismissed without consideration. He felt a surge of frustration so sharp, it was almost painful. This wasn't about offense. It was about control. He called the management company immediately. Dave answered, his voice weary and distracted. Dave, this is Alex Henderson at 124 Willow Creek. I'm calling about your email. Ah, yes. Mr. Henderson. Look, I'm just the messenger here. The board makes the decisions. But they haven't addressed a single point I made. Dave, Alex said, struggling to keep his voice even. They can't just invent a rule called a view corridor. I have the plat map. I have the CC&Rs. Section 8.4.2 explicitly limits their authority to common areas. My fence is not on a common area. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. The board interprets the governing documents. Alex, their interpretation is that the fence violates the community's aesthetic standards, which they have the authority to maintain. So they're just making it up as they go along. Look, Dave said, his voice dropping. My advice, just move the fence. It's not worth the fight. Alex felt a cold resolve settle over him. No, he said quietly. I'm not doing that. The fight, it seemed, was exactly what they wanted. 2 days later, a second certified letter arrived. This one was a notice of hearing. It informed him that, due to his failure to cure the violation, he was summoned to appear before the board in 2 weeks' time. The letter also contained a new, chilling detail at said hearing. The board will consider the imposition of a fine of $100 per day, retroactive to the date of the initial violation notice. Alex did the math. The fine would already be over $1,000. He was no longer just fighting for a principle or a piece of wood. He was fighting a system that was actively trying to extort money from him under the guise of rules it refused to define. The polite, fact-based approach had failed. The system was rigged. He closed his eyes and pictured Carol Miller's smug, serene smile. He was being managed, stonewalled, and railroaded into a sham hearing where the verdict was already decided. He realized then that he couldn't win by playing their game. He had to change the game entirely. His home office, once a sanctuary of creative design, became a war room. Alex pushed aside his architectural drawings and unrolled the official plat map from the county recorder's office, securing its corners with heavy books. The map was a large, crisp document, its black ink lines a declaration of unassailable fact. He traced his finger along the boundaries of Lot 124 again and again, as if the physical act of touching the line could reinforce its reality. There were no easements, no covenants, no mention of any corridor, scenic or otherwise, recorded against his property. His case was built on this paper. It was his bedrock. But bedrock wasn't enough. Carol and the board operated in a world of whispers and unwritten rules. To fight them, he needed to understand their world. He started by calling the one person he could think of who might talk Mrs. Gable. He found her number in the community directory and dialed, feeling a pang of guilt for drawing her back into this mess. She answered on the second ring, her voice small and cautious. Mrs. Gable, this is Alex Henderson, your neighbor from down the street. I was at the HOA meeting a few weeks ago. Oh, yes. The one about my gnome. she said, the embarrassment still fresh in her voice. I'm so sorry about how you were treated, Alex said gently. The reason I'm calling is that the board is now coming after me for the fence I built in my backyard. They're using the same vague tactics. I was hoping you might have some insight. Has this happened to you before? There was a long pause. They told me not to talk about it, she whispered. Who did? Carol. She called me the day after the meeting. She said it was for the best if community disagreements were handled privately. It was a threat, wrapped in the language of neighborly concern. Mrs. Gable, Alex pressed. They're trying to fine me hundreds of dollars for a fence that is perfectly legal. They did the same to you over a garden gnome. This is a pattern. If we don't stand up to it, it will continue. He could hear her take a shaky breath. 2 years ago, she began, her voice barely audible. My husband, before he passed, wanted to plant a Japanese maple in the front yard. We submitted the plan, the committee, which is just Carol and her friend from the board, denied it. They said it wasn't a native species. The next month, the house 2 doors down from Carol put in 2 of them. No one said a word. When my husband asked why, Carol told him the rules were complex and subject to board interpretation. He was so upset. He just gave up. She paused. I have the denial letter somewhere. I could look for it. That would be incredibly helpful, Alex said, his mind racing. Selective enforcement. It was a powerful legal argument, but more importantly, it was proof of the board's hypocrisy. Thank you, Eleanor. Truly. His next step was to request official records. According to the state laws governing HOAs, homeowners had the right to inspect the association's books and records, including meeting minutes. He sent a formal, written request to Sterling Management for the minutes of all board meetings for the past year. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived. Inside were photocopies of the minutes. As Alex read through them, a pattern emerged. The public sections were mundane pool maintenance, gutter cleaning, holiday decoration reminders. But under the heading Executive Session, or New Business, entire paragraphs were obscured by thick, black boxes. The redactions were aggressive, hiding not just a few words, but entire discussions. What could a suburban HOA board be discussing that required this level of secrecy? He looked at the minutes from 3 months prior. Under New Business, there was a long, redacted block, followed by a single, unredacted line motion carries. 3-0. A secret discussion. A secret vote. What were they hiding? The fines were now accumulating. The total on the hearing notice had swelled to over $2,000. The pressure was mounting. Sarah saw the toll it was taking on him the late nights in his office. The tense phone calls. The way his jaw was perpetually tight. Is it worth it? Alex, she asked one evening, her hand resting on his shoulder as he stared at the redacted pages. Maybe we should just pay the fine. I don't want to live like this. This was supposed to be our peaceful place. He turned, taking her hand. If we give in now, it will never be a peaceful place, he said, his voice quiet but firm. They'll own us. They'll know they can bully us into anything. This isn't just about our fence anymore. It's about our home. He knew he was missing a key piece of the puzzle, the piece hidden behind those black bars. He had the law on his side with the plat map and the CC&Rs. He had evidence of a pattern of selective enforcement from Mrs. Gable, but he didn't have the motive. Why were they so obsessed with this specific piece of his property? Why invent a view corridor where none existed? He needed to see what was under those redactions, and he had an idea of how to do it. The county recorder's office was a quiet, dusty place that smelled of old paper and bureaucratic permanence. It was here, surrounded by shelves of heavy binders and whirring microfilm readers, that Alex found an unlikely ally. His name was Ben, a semi-retired title clerk with a shock of white hair, bifocals perched on the end of his nose, and a deep-seated disdain for petty tyrants. Alex had met him when he first came to get a certified copy of his plat map. Ben had seen Alex's methodical approach and taken a liking to him. "Show A trouble. Huh," Ben had mused, stamping the map with a heavy, satisfying thud. Worst form of government ever invented. All the power, none of the accountability. Seen it 100 times. Now, Alex was back, sitting across from Ben at a small table, the redacted minutes spread out between them. "They won't tell me what's under these," Alex explained. "They claim it's privileged information concerning contract negotiations." Ben peered at the pages over his glasses, a faint smile playing on his lips. Privileged is what they call it when they don't want you to see it. But state law says that while they can discuss contract negotiations in a closed session, any actual vote to approve a contract has to be done in an open meeting and recorded in the minutes. He tapped a finger on the line motion carries. 3-0. If they voted on a contract, hiding the details of that vote is a violation of the Open Meeting Act. "So how do I get an unredacted copy?" Alex asked. Ben leaned back in his chair. "Officially, you'd have to sue them. Unofficially," he grinned, "the management company has to file certain records with the state's real estate commission. And sometimes, the version they file isn't the same version they send to nosy homeowners. They get lazy. Forget to use the black marker. Let me make a call. Got an old friend over there who owes me a favor." 2 days later, a plain brown envelope appeared in Alex's mailbox, with no return address. Inside was a single sheaf of papers. It was the unredacted minutes from the meeting 3 months ago. Alex's hands shook slightly as he read the words that had been hidden behind the black ink. "New business discussion of landscape enhancement project for the Willow Creek Common Area Perimeter. President Miller presents a bid from Creative Contours Landscaping for the installation of a new irrigation system and decorative rock features along the southern boundary. The project requires clearing a 15-foot wide swath along the rear property lines of lots 120 through 128 to facilitate equipment access and ensure a uniform aesthetic. The bid is for $75,000. Following discussion of the project's scope and cost, a motion is made to approve the contract with Creative Contours Landscaping. Motion carries. 3-0. Alex felt a jolt, a sudden, sickening flash of understanding. His house was lot 124. The 15-foot wide swath they needed to clear was the exact area where he had just built his fence. The view corridor wasn't about a view at all. It was an access route for a construction project. But that wasn't the bombshell. The real twist was at the bottom of the page. In a handwritten note, Ben had scrawled in the margin, "Alex did a quick corporate search. Creative Contours Landscaping, LLC, registered agent and sole proprietor Gary Nowak." Ben had drawn an arrow from the name. Carol Miller's maiden name was Nowak. Gary is her brother-in-law. It all clicked into place. The vague violation, the stonewalling, the manufactured rule it was all a lie, a cover for a corrupt deal. Carol was using her position as board president to steer a lucrative, no-bid contract to her own family, and Alex's fence, his beautiful, carefully built cedar fence, was in the way. It wasn't about aesthetics or community harmony. It was about greed, a kickback scheme. Plain and simple. He finally had the motive, and he had the proof. The knowledge was both liberating and terrifying. Alex now understood the why, but that understanding also revealed the stakes. This wasn't just a power trip for Carol. It was about money, and people did desperate things for money. He had to assume she would stop at nothing to protect her scheme. His assumption was correct. He sent a formal request for an appeal of the board's decision, citing the new evidence. 2 days later, he received a curt, one-sentence email from Sterling Management. Your request for an appeal is denied. The board's decision is final. It was a declaration of war. The next move was Carol's, and it was swift and brutal. Another certified letter arrived, this one announcing a special meeting of the board of directors. To be held in 1 week. The sole item on the agenda, a vote to authorize the association's legal counsel to place a lien on the property at 124 Willow Creek Lane for failure to cure an outstanding violation and non-payment of fines. The fine total was now approaching $3,000. She was escalating, trying to force him into a corner before he could expose her. A lien on his property would cloud his title, damage his credit, and could, if left unresolved, eventually lead to foreclosure. It was the HOA's nuclear option. He immediately called Mrs. Gable. He explained what he had found, the landscaping contract, the family connection. He asked if she would be willing to speak at the next public meeting, to share her story about the Japanese maple and establish the pattern of selective enforcement. She was hesitant, but the brazenness of Carol's corruption seemed to stiffen her spine. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. Yes, I'll be there. What she's doing is wrong. Alex felt a glimmer of hope. With Mrs. Gable as a witness and his documentary evidence, he might be able to sway other homeowners. But Carol was always one step ahead. 3 days before the special meeting, a violation notice was taped to Mrs. Gable's front door. Alex saw it on his morning walk. It was for a new, trivial infraction. The paint on her mailbox post was peeling. The notice demanded it be repainted within 7 days, or she would face daily fines. It was a clear, unambiguous act of intimidation. That evening, his phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable, and she was crying. I can't do it. Alex, she sobbed. I can't. I'm old. I live on a fixed income. I can't afford more fines. I can't handle the stress. She'll ruin me. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, Alex said, his heart aching for her. He felt a hot surge of anger toward Carol, an anger that burned away his usual calm demeanor. He had tried to play by the rules, but his opponent was a bully who targeted the vulnerable to protect her lies. His key witness was gone. He was on his own. That night, Sarah found him in his office, the glow of his monitor illuminating his grim face. He was printing out large-scale copies of the plat map and the meeting minutes, preparing for a battle he now knew he couldn't avoid. They silenced her, he said, his voice low. They threatened an old woman over peeling paint. He took a picture of Mrs. Gable's mailbox, the violation notice flapping in the breeze. He could use it. He could show everyone at the meeting exactly how Carol operated, how she intimidated her critics into submission. He could win by using her own tactics against her. Be careful. Alex, Sarah whispered, her hand on his neck. This isn't just about offense anymore. This woman is vicious. I know, he said, looking at the evidence laid out on his desk. That's why I can't back down. The special meeting had been canceled, rolled into the community's mandatory annual meeting, a larger venue where Carol likely felt she could better control the narrative. She had made a mistake. An annual meeting meant a larger audience and a required open forum for homeowners. It was the perfect stage. The community clubhouse was packed. The annual meeting had drawn a much larger crowd than the monthly board meetings. Nearly 100 homeowners filled the rows of plastic chairs, drawn by the promise of an annual budget review and the election of a new board member. A large projection screen hung behind the board's table, currently displaying the Grandview Park logo. To its right, a small digital clock was mounted on a tripod, its red numerals glowing ominously, 0500. This was for the homeowner comment period, a 5-minute window for residents to air their grievances. Alex had signed up the moment he arrived. He was number 3 on the list. He sat in the 4th row, a slim portfolio case resting on his lap. Inside was his arsenal, a large printout of the official plat map, a highlighted copy of the CCNRs, the redacted minutes, the unredacted minutes, and the photo of Mrs. Gable's mailbox with the violation notice. He felt a steady, heavy beat against his ribs, a slow rhythm he focused on to keep his voice even. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent anchor. Across the room, he saw Mrs. Gable. She gave him a small, apologetic smile and quickly looked away, her fear palpable. Carol Miller, radiating confidence in a sharp navy blue blazer, called the meeting to order. She moved through the initial agenda items with brisk efficiency: the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee update, a cheerful summary of the year's social events. She was masterful, projecting an image of competent, benevolent leadership. Finally, she arrived at the part of the meeting Alex was waiting for. And that brings us to the homeowner comment period, she announced with a practiced smile. As a reminder, each speaker will have 5 minutes. Please be respectful and concise. First up, Mr. Jennings from Oak Terrace. A man stood up to complain about dog waste. The clock started its countdown. 4 minutes and 59 seconds later, he sat down. The second speaker lamented the condition of the tennis court nets. Alex's turn was next. Our third and final speaker is Alex Henderson from Willow Creek Lane, Carol said, her eyes glinting with something that looked like amusement. The name on the list had clearly not surprised her. Alex stood and walked to the single microphone at the front of the room. He placed his portfolio on the small lectern and turned to face his neighbors. He could feel Carol's stare on his back. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady. "My name is Alex Henderson. My wife and I live at 124 Willow Creek Lane. For the past month, the board has been trying to fine me thousands of dollars and place a lien on my home for offense they claim violates a rule they call a common area view corridor. They claim this rule gives them authority over my private property." He opened his portfolio. "I'm an architect. I believe in facts and documents. So let's look at the documents." He pulled out the large plat map and held it up. "Exhibit A," he said, his voice projecting through the room. "This is the official plat map for our community, on file with the county. It legally defines every lot and all common areas. As you can see, there is no easement and no view corridor recorded anywhere on my property. The area in question is, by law, my private land." He placed the map on an easel he had set up beside the lectern. The digital clock now read 0400. So, what do our own governing documents say about the board's authority? He pulled out his highlighted copy of the CCNRs. "I'd like to direct your attention to Article 8, Section 8.4.2. He had already given a copy to the AV technician. As he spoke, the text flashed onto the large screen behind the board. The yellow highlighting was clearly visible. The association's authority to regulate structures is confined exclusively to common areas, as defined in the official plat map. A murmur went through the crowd. Homeowners were leaning forward, reading the screen. Alex saw Carol shift uncomfortably in her chair. The clock read 0300. So, if the fence isn't on a common area, and the CCNRs say the board has no authority, why is this happening? I asked myself that same question. The answer, it turns out, is in the meeting minutes. He held up two documents. On the left is a copy of the minutes from a board meeting 3 months ago, which I received from the management company. As you can see, a large portion is redacted. He put the redacted copy on the easel. On the right is the unredacted version. He placed the unredacted copy next to it. The room fell silent. He walked the audience through it, his voice calm and precise, like an architect explaining a blueprint. These minutes reveal a secret vote to award a $75,000 landscaping contract to a company called Creative Contours Landscaping. The contract requires clearing a 15-foot wide path for equipment right through the backyards of 8 homes, including mine. The view corridor was a lie, invented to clear a path for this project. The clock ticked past 01:00. He saved the final piece for last. And who owns Creative Contours Landscaping? A public record search reveals the owner is a man named Gary Nowak. He paused, letting the name hang in the air before turning to look directly at Carol. Carol Miller's brother-in-law. The room erupted. An angry roar of questions and accusations filled the space. Carol's face, projected onto the large screen by the room's camera, was a mask of fury and shock. She banged her gavel, but the sound was lost in the noise. Alex looked at the clock. 30 seconds remaining. He reached into his portfolio for the last piece of evidence, the photo of Mrs. Gable's mailbox, the proof of Carol's intimidation tactics. He could seal his victory, show everyone not just that Carol was corrupt, but that she was a cruel bully. He looked out into the audience, and his eyes met Mrs. Gable's. She looked terrified, a deer in the headlights, caught in the crossfire he had created. In that moment, he saw that using her pain to win his fight would make him no better than Carol. It would be a victory at the expense of another person's dignity. He slid the photo back into his portfolio. He leaned into the microphone, his voice cutting through the din. My case rests on the facts of my property and the contents of this board's own records, not on the board's treatment of others. He looked at the clock. War 007. I cede my remaining time. He walked back to his seat, the noise of the room swelling around him. Sarah gripped his hand, her eyes shining with pride. He hadn't just won the argument. He had won it the right way. The chaos in the room was immediate and absolute. The carefully managed facade of Carol's authority crumbled in seconds. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. The other board members looked stunned, turning to Carol, who sat frozen, her face pale, the gavel lying useless in her hand. Is this true? Carol, someone yelled from the back. Did you give our money to your family? This is an outrage. I want to see the books, another voice boomed. Dave, the property manager from Sterling Management, who had been trying to make himself as small as possible at the end of the table, suddenly sprang into action. He saw the impending legal nightmare, the breach of fiduciary duty, the conflict of interest, the potential for a class action lawsuit. He leaned over and spoke urgently into Carol's ear. Her face, still projected in massive detail on the screen, went from furious to ashen. A man in the front row, a retired attorney Alex recognized from a previous meeting, stood up. I move for an immediate, independent, third-party forensic audit of the association's finances for the last 3 years. Seconded came a chorus of voices. And I move for a vote of no confidence in President Miller, yelled another homeowner. Before Carol could even respond, Dave stepped up to the microphone. Order, please. Let's have order, he pleaded. He adjusted his tie, his face slick with sweat. In light of the information presented this evening, Sterling Management recommends that the board table all pending actions related to architectural violations until a full review can be conducted. The proposed lien action against Mr. Henderson is hereby suspended indefinitely. He was cutting his losses, throwing Carol overboard to save his own ship. The crowd roared its approval. Alex sat quietly next to Sarah, watching the power structure of his community realign itself in real time. He had come here tonight expecting a fight, but he had started a revolution. He saw Mrs. Gable across the room. She was no longer looking at him with fear, but with a look of profound gratitude. She gave him a small, firm nod. The meeting descended into procedural chaos, with motions and points of order flying. The vote of no confidence was scheduled for a special meeting the following week. The motion for an independent audit passed with a nearly unanimous show of hands. Carol Miller sat in stunned silence. A queen deposed, her reign over. The meeting was adjourned, and, as people filed out, a steady stream of them stopped by Alex's chair to shake his hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of petty harassment by the board. He was no longer just the man with the fence. He was the man who had spoken up. Weeks later, the fallout settled. The forensic audit confirmed everything Alex had uncovered and more. It revealed a pattern of no-bid contracts, inflated invoices from Creative Contours Landscaping for minor common area work over the past 2 years, and an undeclared financial interest that was a clear violation of the association's bylaws and state law. Faced with irrefutable proof and the threat of legal action from the HOA's own insurance carrier, Carol Miller and the 2 board members who had voted with her quietly resigned. A special election was held. A new board was voted in, composed of reform-minded homeowners who promised transparency and accountability. One of their first acts was to formally rescind the violation notice against Alex and issue him a written apology. They also passed a new bylaw requiring all contracts over $5,000 to go through a public, competitive bidding process. Alex was asked to serve as an advisor to the new Architectural Review Committee, a position he accepted on the condition that they throw out the absurdly subjective rules about aesthetics and stick to clear, measurable standards based on the CC&Rs. The Garden Gnome rule was the first to go. One rainy Saturday afternoon, a month later, Alex was in his garage, cleaning out old boxes from the move. In a file labeled Old Business Professional, he found a folder from a commercial project his architectural firm had bid on 5 years ago, before he and Sarah had even considered moving to Grandview Park. It had been a big contract to design a new regional office park. His firm had won. As he idly flipped through the pages, a letter caught his eye. It was from the project developer, listing the other firms that had been in the final running. The second name on the list of unsuccessful bidders was Miller Construction and Design, a firm owned and operated by Carol's husband. A small, handwritten note in the margin from his old boss read, "They underbid us, but their design was a mess. Good riddance." Alex stared at the letter, a final, unexpected piece of the puzzle clicking into place. This whole ordeal, the harassment, the lies, the attack on his home hadn't just been about a kickback scheme. It had started long before that. It had been personal. Carol's vendetta wasn't just about a fence getting in the way of her brother-in-law's contract. It was about a professional grudge, a perceived slight from years ago that had festered into a petty, vindictive obsession. His fence had simply been the excuse she was waiting for. He closed the folder and put it back in the box. It didn't matter anymore. He walked out of the garage and into his backyard. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. He looked at the clean, strong lines of the cedar fence, and beyond it, at Sarah, who was kneeling in her therapy garden, gently tending to a row of lavender, a peaceful smile on her face. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar and new beginnings. The sanctuary was safe.